Hey dudes, today I want to talk about the settings or preferences window in Pro Tools. You may have heard me say before, go to Pro Tools and then preferences to change things about the preferences for your Pro Tools, but they have recently changed it to say settings. But have no fear, there is still a preferences window you can access. So let's jump into it and I'll show you a couple things that I like to change and a couple of things that you may want to change to keep your session the way that you want it to be. All right, so you may have heard me say before, go to Pro Tools and then preferences, and it's not there. It's called settings now. If that really bugs you, you can go to setup and preferences. They in fact do the same thing, but they've just changed the language. So I'll go to settings. You've also probably heard me say before that I like to have my default clip color coding to be track color. That means all your clips will match what the track color is. Feel free to do what you want, but that is a preference I prefer. I also like to organize plugins by category and manufacturer. So that would be like, category would be like Dynamics, EQ, manufacturer would be like Avid, Waves. So you can access it through that menu. I personally like to keep this UI theme classic. You know, I'm an old school guy, but you can change it to this dark theme, which is objectively a little bit more sleek. It's just harder for me personally to see some things, so I keep it on classic. In the operation tab, you can find a lot of interesting things. I'm only going to highlight mostly this destructive punch file length. So if you are using destructive punch to record things, and it's only 8 minutes long or whatever your default is, basically you just change this to just be a little bit longer than what your project is. And then the destructive punch file that it creates before you actually record will be the length that you need it to be. Otherwise, it's good to just peek around here. I would just say, make sure your auto backup is on. You can pick how often that happens, but I would say that is a good idea to have auto backup engaged. In the editing tab, I've kind of already gone over this, but you got your fade in, your fade out, which I personally like to keep at equal gain. So it's just a nice straight line. And then the crossfade, I like to do equal power. So it might be like this to start, but change it there because it's harder for me to hear these crossfades happening. It just does a nice quick blend of everything, which is great. And then for me personally, I do my clip gain nudge value 1.5. We generally consider 3 dB in the audio community as one move, a full move up or down. So I just do a half a move. And again, that is my control shift and arrow key up and down. I have a whole video about that. Maybe it's flashing across the top. I don't know. But a couple of good things to change in editing there. In mixing, one thing that just kind of drives me bonkers is after a right pass, switch to, for me, I don't want any change. Sometimes it'll switch to latch, and I don't personally understand that. If you need to change automation to latch, to me, that's no problem. I just don't know why you would want to touch something, think a track is in touch, and then it switches to latch. So for me, I change that. Another thing you can do if you want in this menu is if you have a dedicated EQ that you like, you can make that your default EQ. Same thing with Dynamics. So those are the two stock ones that I have videos about. But it's kind of nice. They just pop up right away if that is your default plugin that you'd like to use for EQ and Dynamics. And of course, just make sure you hit OK when you're done so it saves all those settings. All right, I know this is not in the preferences or settings menu, but let's do a little bonus round here. I don't personally usually use pre and post roll, but that's Command K or in this option menu. So if you need to hit play and have it start earlier or hit stop and have it stop after, that's pre and post roll. I love loop playback. I do not love any type of scrolling. Often mixers will use continuous, which keeps the playhead in the middle of the screen. Sometimes editors will like page. For me, I just like no scrolling. I just like to, zoom in and out, go to the place I need to. Often my movie's playing. I don't want Pro Tools to automatically adjust. So I will personally do no scrolling, for example. And then another thing I'd like to call out on this menu is I do not like my solo mode to latch by any means necessary. I like it to X or, which is going to cancel the previous solo. So basically what that means is that if I hit solo here and then I go to another track, it cancels the previous solo, doing exactly what solo is, which is soloing that specific track. The latch will make them stack on top of each other. So if you need to do that, like I need to solo these two tracks, which is silly in this session since it only has 2 tracks. But let's say you have 100 tracks and you just want to hear these 2. All you have to do is hold Shift, then click, and it stacks them. I like to just be able to quickly go, oh, I need to just hear what's in this track. Boom. Oh, I need to hear what's in both of these tracks or 3 tracks, and then I just hold Shift and you're good to go. And then a couple more honorable mentions is you can go to your main transport window here. And if you are doing film sound, we often operate in time code, but maybe bars and beats for music or something, it's all good. But time code for sound, make sure your grid is on. If the grid is just not highlighted and on, that's a bummer. You can't see exactly a frame at a time, which we also need to change to. So if you do a second, you see that's a much different looking grid. We don't really operate in seconds for sound. We operate in frame. And time code, which is at the bottom here. Again, there's lots of other options, so whatever you need, but make sure you set your grid to be what you need. And then I personally think your nudge should match that grid so that you're nudging on the grid, but up to you, whatever you need to do. A subframe, that's very, very small, but you could do that and it could work, but 1 frame time code is a good starting point for film. All right, I know that's not the most exciting information that you can get about Pro Tools, but I do think it's very important that you just feel comfy when you're sitting down and getting ready to do your session the way that you want to do it. So consider changing settings or preferences, and consider poking around a little bit with some of the other bonus stuff that I showed you guys to just make it exactly the way you want to, and then you can get to work. So I hope this was useful, and I hope you get to use some of these settings or preferences in your next projects. And until next time, later dudes.